The Millennia stories of Aldiss and Hegelian perspective. What is the nature of the catastrophe? Well, we'll start with some Kant from his ideas for a universal history. I've selected 3 theses here. His second thesis, in man, as the only rational creature on earth, those natural capacities which are directed to the use of his reason are to be fully developed only in the race, not in the individual. 8th thesis, the history of mankind can be seen, in the large, as the realization of nature's secret plan to bring forth a perfectly constituted state as the only condition in which the capacities of mankind can be fully developed, and also bring forth that external relation among states which is perfectly adequate to this end. And the 9th thesis, I hate that word because I have a bit of a lisp, thesis, a philosophical attempt to work out a universal history according to a natural plan directed to achieving the civic union of the human race, must be regarded as possible and indeed as contributing to this end of nature. Nature has a secret plan. Like any other natural event, human actions are determined by natural laws. Every individual, according to his or her own inclinations and purposes, chooses his or her path, frequently in opposition to others, but each individual and people, as though following some guiding thread, move toward a natural, but to each of them unknown goal. That which appears to be complex and chaotic in a single individual can be observed from the standpoint of the human race as a whole to be a stable and progressive gradual evolution. A stable and progressive gradual evolution. Humankind has to consider its own development as one of nature's objectives. On this view, history is from the very outset governed by providence, and then by, well, we'll come to that in a moment actually, that word providence, and then by the humans themselves, and self-consciousness is to be attained only upon a people being free to govern themselves both individually and collectively. The ultimate purpose of the human race is to achieve the most perfect civic constitution, the most effective representative institutions, which for Kant is called republicanism, the fulfillment of the destiny of humankind. Human society, producing its moral institutions in such an autonomous and spontaneous manner, serves to replace the older ideas of the finger of God or divine providence, and this has had a profound impact upon thinking about history. Some more Kant here from his universal history. From such crooked wood as man is made of, nothing perfectly straight can be built. That it is the last problem to be solved follows also from this. It requires that there be a correct conception of a possible constitution, great experience gained in many paths of life, and far beyond these, a good will, ready to accept such a constitution. 3 such things are very hard, and if they are ever to be found together, it will be very late, and after many vain attempts. Footnote. This is Kant's footnote. The role of man is very artificial. How it may be with the dwellers on other planets. Because Kant he brings up aliens in his critique of pure reason as well, you know, which is rather strange for somebody who's so opposed to speculative thinking. But anyway, it brings up aliens here as well. The role of man is very artificial. How it may be with the dwellers on other planets and their nature, we do not know. If, however, we carry out well the mandate given us by nature, we can perhaps flatter ourselves that we may claim among our neighbours in the cosmos no mean rank. Maybe among them each individual can perfectly attain his destiny in his own life. Among us, it is different. Only the human race can hope to attain it. Now, we have a similar kind of doctrine to be found in Adam Smith, the invisible hand. This is from the theory of moral sentiments where he first mentions it, although more famously he mentions it in the Wealth of Nations. But I am just giving this as an example. The produce of the soil maintains at all times nearly that number of inhabitants, which it is capable of maintaining. The rich only select from the heap what is most precious and agreeable. They consume little more than the poor, and in spite of their natural selfishness and rapacity, though they mean only their own conveniency, though the sole end which they propose from the labours of all, the thousands whom they employ, be the gratification of their own vain and insatiable desires, they divide with the poor the produce of all their improvements. They are led by an invisible hand to make nearly the same distribution of the necessaries of life which would have been made had the earth been divided into equal portions among all its inhabitants, and thus, without intending it, without knowing it, advance the interest of society and afford means to the multiplication of the species. When Providence, there's that word again, divided the earth among a few lordly masters, it neither forgot nor abandoned those who seemed to have been left out of the partition. These last two enjoy their share of all that it produces. In what constitutes the real happiness of human life, they are in no respect inferior to those who would seem so much above them. In ease of body and peace of mind, all the different ranks of life are nearly upon a level, and the beggar, who suns himself by the side of the highway, possesses that security which kings are fighting for. The invisible hand, a metaphor, employed by Smith, who is an economist and moral philosopher, to describe the incentives that free markets, this is in the Wealth of Nations way particularly emphasises this, sometimes generate for self-interested people to unintentionally act in the public interest. For instance, wealth concentrated in the hands of one person who wastes his wealth, but who thereby employs others, which is a very simple example of the supposed invisible hand at work. Now, we find a similar doctrine in Adam Ferguson in his essay on the history of civil society. Men in general are sufficiently disposed to occupy themselves in forming projects and schemes, but he who would scheme and project for others will find an opponent in every person who is disposed to scheme for himself. Like the winds that come we know not whence, and blow whithersoever they list, the forms of society are derived from an obscure and a distant origin. They arise long before the date of philosophy, from the instincts, not from the speculations of men. The crowd of mankind are directed in their establishments and measures by the circumstances in which they are placed, and seldom are turned from their way to follow the plan of any single projector. Every step and every movement of the multitude, even in what we are termed enlightened ages, are made with equal blindness to the future, and nations stumble upon establishments which are indeed the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. If Cromwell, this is Oliver Cromwell obviously, if Cromwell said that a man never mounts higher than when he knows not whither he is going, it may with more reason be affirmed of communities that they admit of the greatest revolutions where no change is intended, and that the most refined politicians do not always know whither they are leading the state by their projects. I can identify with what Cromwell is saying there, actually, because to be honest, I don't know what I'm doing most of the time, but I do manage to get things done occasionally, to my own surprise, at what actually turns out. Anyway, Ferguson is theorizing about how certain phenomena in the social order, social structures, practices and institutions are to be explained as coming about as the result of the actions of numerous ordinary human beings and not by design. Such a perspective, according to which the meaning of history was to be extracted from some sort of transcendent premise, was gradually succeeded by the view that the meaning of history was imminent. Now, to bring back Kant here, just to be careful what we are talking about. In fact, I might be using his own words against him here. He says in the Critique of Pure Reason, teachers of jurisprudence, when speaking of rights and claims, distinguish in a cause the question of right, quid juris, from the question of fact, quid facti. And while they demand proof of both, they give to the proof of the former, which goes to establish right or claim in law, the name of deduction. Now we make use of a great number of empirical conceptions without opposition from anyone, and consider ourselves, even without any attempt at deduction, justified in attaching to them a sense and a supposition, signification, because we have always experience at hand to demonstrate their objective reality. There exist also, however, usurped conceptions, such as fortune, fate, Schicksal is the word in German he's talking about, which circulate with almost universal indulgence and yet are occasionally challenged by the question quid juris. In such cases, we have great difficulty in discovering any deduction for these terms, inasmuch as we cannot produce any manifest ground of right, either from experience or from reason, on which the claim to employ them can be founded. So if you take a word like fate or destiny, we use these words really as though we know what they mean. He was fated to do such and such. It is his destiny or her destiny. Well, what do we mean by those words? Do we know? But we use them anyway as though we do know what they mean. Usurped conceptions. What about nature's secret plan, the invisible hand, destiny? Right, back to Adam Smith, because he uses the invisible hand here. And we can wonder whether he's being serious when he's talking about This is from the history of astronomy. He's talking about the origins of philosophy here, though, specifically. The tree which now flourishes and now decays is inhabited by a dyad. This is going back to ancient superstitions, upon whose health or sickness its various appearances depend. The fountain, which sometimes flows in a copious, and sometimes in a scanty stream, which appears sometimes clear and limpid, and at other times muddy and disturbed, is affected in all its changes by the naiad who dwells within it. Hence the origin of polytheism, and of that vulgar superstition which ascribes all the irregular events of nature to the favour or displeasure of intelligent, though invisible beings, to gods, demons, witches, genii, fairies. For it may be observed that in all polytheistic religions, among savages as well as in the early ages of heathen antiquity, it is the irregular events of nature only that are ascribed to the agency and power of their gods. Fire burns and water refreshes. Heavy bodies descend and lighter substances fly upwards. By the necessity of their own nature, nor with the invisible hand of Jupiter ever apprehended to be employed in those matters, but thunder and lightning, storms and sunshine, those more irregular events were ascribed to his favour or his anger. Hegel transmuted Kant's remarks upon the hidden plan of nature into his doctrine of the cunning of reason, List der Vernunft. And this is from the lectures on the philosophy of history. A world historical individual is not so unwise as to indulge a variety of wishes to divide his regards. He is devoted to the one aim, regardless of all else. It is even possible that such men may treat other great, even sacred interests inconsiderately, conduct which is indeed obnoxious to moral reprehension. But so mighty a form must trample down many an innocent flower, crush to pieces many an object in its path. He's just speaking metaphorically here. I don't think we need to take it too literally. The special interest of passion is thus inseparable from the active development of a general principle, for it is from the special and determinate, and from its negation, that the universal results. Particularity contends with its like, and some loss is involved in the issue. It is not the general idea that is implicated in opposition and combat, and that is exposed to danger. It remains in the background untouched and uninjured. This may be called the cunning of reason, that it sets the passions to work for itself, while that which develops its existence through such impulsion pays the penalty and suffers loss. For it is phenomenal being that is so treated, and of this part is of no value, part is positive and real. The particular is for the most part of too trifling value as compared with the general. Individuals are sacrificed and abandoned. The idea pays the penalty of determinate existence and of compatibility, not from itself, but from the passions of individuals. The higher purposes of reason, the telos of history, telos, the end, are realized tangentially through the exercise of the passions, self-interest and motives of individuals, and the historical agent, by acting out his or her own will, unwittingly acts as an instrument of reason, whereby his or her passions, pride, ambition, envy, avarice, are seen to be the personal attendants at the service of reason. The subjective individual may well seem independent of, or indeed in conflict with, the objective necessity of reason, yet the fact of the matter is that in each historical period they coincide. Their mediation is affected by the cunning of reason. The doctrine of the invisible hand and the doctrine of the cunning of reason portray a dialectic tension between intent and outcome, and both doctrines focus upon the fact that the consequences of human action need not be the outcome of any human design, and furthermore, they both spring from the recognition that some unintended and unexpected consequences of human action may fulfill a purpose, may serve a valuable function, may lead to progress or to an excellent result. Hence, such unintended consequences seem to be the consequence of some outstanding planning. But the notion of the cunning of reason is meant to apply to the actions of a few great men only. A few great men and women, I should have said there. I keep trying to be inclusive. To the actions of the historical heroes or the world historical individuals, Pericles, Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, who, unbeknownst to themselves, are the instruments of the deeds of the world mind that leads to the progress of the universal spirit. It is they whose own particular purposes comprehend the substantial content which is the will of the world spirit. Hegel gives as an example Julius Caesar, who was assassinated as soon as he has done his part in bringing the work of the Republic to an end. He is an expendable instrument of reason indeed. Caesar, in danger of losing a position, not perhaps at that time of superiority, yet at least of equality with the others who were at the head of the state, and of succumbing to those who were just on the point of becoming his enemies, belongs essentially to this category. These enemies, who were at the same time pursuing their personal aims, had the form of the constitution and the power conferred by an appearance of justice on their side. Caesar was contending for the maintenance of his position, honour and safety, and since the power of his opponents included the sovereignty over the provinces of the Roman Empire, his victory secured for him the conquest of that entire empire, and he thus became, though leaving the form of the constitution, the autocrat of the state. That which secured for him the execution of a design, which in the first instance was of negative import, the autocracy of Rome, was, however, at the same time an independently necessary feature in the history of Rome and of the world. It was not then his private gain merely, but an unconscious impulse that occasioned the accomplishment of that for which the time was ripe. Such are all great historical men, whose own particular aims involve those larger issues which are the will of the world spirit. And I do love quoting from Shakespeare. Pardon, Caesar, because I wanted to be an actor at one point, Caesar, pardon, as low as to thy foot doth Cassius fall, to beg enfranchisement for Publius Simba. I could be well moved if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me, but I am constant as the northern star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament. The skies are painted with unnumbered sparks, they are all fire, and every one doth shine. But there's but one in all doth hold his place, so in the world 'tis furnished well with men, and men of flesh and blood, and apprehensive, yet in the number I do know but one, that unassailable holds on his rank, unshaked of motion, and that I am he. Let me a little show it, even in this, that I was constant, Simba should be banished, and constant do remain to keep him so. O Caesar, hence wilt thou lift up Olympus? Great Caesar, doth not Brutus heal? Speak, hands for me. Et tu, Bousset? Then false Caesar. Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead. Run hence, proclaim, cried about the streets. Some to the common pulpits and cry out, liberty, freedom, and enfranchisement. People and senators, be not affrighted, fly not, stand still. Ambition's debt is paid. Ambition, you see, the cunning of reason. Human passions used against the person to bring about, as it says, liberty, freedom, enfranchisement. Such a feature of the doctrine of the cunning of reason distinguished it sharply from that of the corresponding features in the doctrine of the invisible hand, for an explanation in terms of an invisible hand to work requires the postulation of a legion of non-heroic individuals privately pursuing their own particular purposes. History for Hegel is not a tale told by an idiot, but a tale the theme of which is the liberation of human consciousness, a tale of humanity's ever-growing self-understanding, and the notion of the realization of conceptual development unfolds by means of the concrete actions of individuals. The world historical individuals, according to Karl Lewith, act historically by being acted upon by the power and cunning of reason, which is to Hegel a rational expression for divine providence. And this, of course, is a very unhelpful way of looking at it. Remember what Kant said about usurped conceptions. It might be thought that the historical heroes contribute to the unfolding tale through their actions, while they themselves are only vaguely or instinctively, or maybe not at all, aware of the conceptual unfolding in which they partake. But what they are aware or not aware of is of no matter. Reason is in operation, reason overcoming contradictions. The contribution of the hero consists not so much in dramatic action or something of the nature of a military victory, or in the establishment of a new order, but in the undermining of existing orders, in showing the way towards new alternatives, through generating a critical situation, thereby making ready history for its next stage. There's a division between the lack of understanding on the part of the historical hero on the one hand, and his or her contribution to the growing self-understanding of humanity or of the spirit on the other. Reason is the sovereign of the world. History has its final purpose and an ultimate design, and this is not to postulate agency or intentionality or some hidden mind. The design is to be understood in the sense of a pattern, as in the design of an intricate sense of a plan or a plot. It is the design of the logical ideational necessity of the rational causality which the historical development concretizes. What is abstract becomes concrete and unfolds. Now, the War Millennia by Brian Aldiss. To begin then, though it is certainly no beginning, the first fragment is of a strange past world, where clouds of nationalism have gathered and broken into a storm of war. The beleaguered people of that day have not fully comprehended the nature of the struggle in which they are engulfed. The theme here is the nature of the catastrophe. Bear that in mind when thinking about the cunning of reason. What is the nature of the catastrophe? Those simple blacks, whites and greys which constitute the political situation are grasped readily enough with a little application, but behind these issues lie factors scarcely understood in the council chambers of Peking, London, Cairo or Washington. factors which stem from the long and savage past of the race, factors of intrinsic and frustrated instinct, factors of fear and lust and dawning conscience, factors inseparable from the adolescence of his species, which loom behind all man's affairs like an insurmountable mountain chain. So men fought each other instead of wrestling with themselves. The bravest sought to evade the currents of hatred by turning outward to the nearest planets in the solar system, the cowardly by slipping away their lives in vast hives called dreameries, where the comforts of fantasy could discount the depredations of war. Neither course ultimately offered refuge. When the earthquake comes, it topples both tower and hovel. The director of the particular dreamery where our story unfolds refers to the dreamers contemptuously as slugs. But he takes an interest in one dreamer, Floyd Milton, because he didn't look the type, nor did he look like a hardened spaceman recuperating after the fervour of a lengthy space journey to Mars or Ganymede or wherever. He looked like a man who had betrayed himself and knew it. So the director enters Floyd's dreams. Sometimes men, real men, could be saved from themselves before they sank too low. And he finds himself in a palace on an alien world. How it may be with the dwellers on other planets and their nature we do not know, said Kant, remember. But here we are to imagine the nature of an alien race. As he normally did upon carrying out such supervisions, the director quickly made a mental survey of his own world. How do you orient yourself in someone else's dream? Keep bearing in mind what I have said about the cunning of reason here, in what I'm saying. This is certainly getting out of one's comfort zone. Plus, the ideological barriers. Now this is important too, because this is where we are very much today. The ideological barriers erected all over Earth since the 40s of the 20th century had ruled out any advance in human happiness. The Solars had arrived on Earth just before the beginning of the 21st century, not in spaceships, but in what they called port matters, by which they could broadcast themselves to Earth from the solar world. Their science was a power science far beyond Earth's understanding, yet they took an innocent delight in Earth. The Solites adored Earth, and with the happy agreement of the Earthlings, they loaded their port matters with Earth's riches, which that for them was not gold or uranium, but rather Earth's plants and animals and butterflies. They had been adorable people, sophisticated savages, welcoming all of life. When the Cold War suddenly blew hot, they had disappeared, declaring they could never return. Now the Solites had kept secret the location of their world. One particular Solite, Amada Malrefi, had taken a husband, which was Floyd Milton, an earthling husband, and they lived in the palace on her world. Interspecies marriage. It reminded me, when I first read it, of Stanislav Lem's fiasco. Was the universe nothing but a very large pie, and a civilization a child trying to consume the pie as quickly as possible? The notion of invasions by aliens was a projection of the aggressive traits of the predatory, barely civilized ape-man. If he himself willingly did unto others as he would rather not be done by, then he pictured the advanced civilization on much the same principle. Flotillas of galactic battleships were supposed to fall upon unsuspecting little planets to lay hands on the local dollars, diamonds, chocolates, and of course beautiful women, for whom aliens had about as much use as we did for female crocodiles. Floyd's particular all too human passions. Okay, there's a typo. That should be T-double-O. Particular all too I need a proofreader. Floyd's particular all too human passions ensure everything falls apart. Guilt was his trouble. At home his country was at war, while here everything was created for pleasure. He feels hatred and distrust upon being introduced to another earthling. Chunwa. This man belongs to a nation which is at war with mine, he said. Floyd is bitter as he notes that Chunwa's command of the solid language, another typo, is more fluent than his own. The Stolites do not understand the antagonism. They are both earthmen, after all. Now, here we have more details that are significant. When you talk about the situations in which reason is supposed to be operating. The concept of nationality seemed above the heads of most of the women present. They belonged to a sparsely populated world where the ubiquitous port matters rendered segregation into groups an impermanent affair. Floyd tries to explain, speaking in the Stolite tongue, but since to his knowledge that language had no exact equivalent for the words nation and war, he was forced to use instead the equivalents for group and trouble. The limitations of language. When he is told they are, and of course communication, especially with extraterrestrials after all, when he is told they are both soul-eyed men now, and Earth is far away and has no claims on him, the words have exactly the wrong effect and he feels guilt. Clearly, either he or Chunwa has to go. Floyd flees and finds a port martyr, in the meantime having acquired a weapon. He sees Chunwa and other Solites pursuing him. He raises his weapon, taking aim. Chunwa makes an appeal to him. Don't fire, he called that in Solite. Floyd Milton, please listen to me. I am not your antagonist. You do not understand. Quite evidently you have not been told as much about this world as I have. I don't want to hear a thing, Milton shouted. At which point a Dream 5 suffers an indirect hit from a cobalt warhead, and Floyd awakens. He explains what happened to the director. It was not Chunwa he had killed. Amada had tried to take the gun from him, had even pleaded for Chunwa, when Floyd had threatened to shoot him, and with that an intense stab of jealousy triggered Floyd's anger, and he fired. He had killed Amada. At the memory of it, Milton broke into fresh lamentation. I'm a murderer, Milton groaned. He sat up convulsively. Oh God, what I did. Now here we bring in something else into the mix. Our tendency towards abstract thinking. What thinks? Who thinks abstractly? The uneducated, not the educated. Good society does not think abstractly because it is too easy, because it is too lowly, not referring to the external status, and from an empty affectation of debility that will place itself above that of which it is not capable, but on account of the inward inferiority of the matter. This is Hegel, Who Thinks Abstractly, an early essay that he wrote. The prejudice and respect for abstract thinking are so great that sensitive nostrils will begin to smell some satire or irony at this point, but since they read the morning paper they know that there is a prize to be had for satires, and that I should therefore sooner earn it by competing for it than give up here without further ado. I have only to adduce examples for my propositions. Everybody will agree that they confirm it. A murderer is led to the place of execution. For the common populace he is nothing but a murderer. Ladies perhaps remark that he is a strong, handsome, interesting man. The populace finds this remark terrible. What, a murderer? Handsome? How can one think so wickedly and call a murderer handsome? And no doubt you yourselves are something not much better. This is the corruption of morals that is prevalent in the upper classes. A priest may add, knowing the bottom of things and human beasts. This is abstract thinking. To see nothing in the murderer except the abstract fact that he is a murderer, and to annul all other human essence in him with this simple quality. Right. Human essence. We are not defined by our passions, but our essence. So, bombing is heard outside the dreamy. As bombing is heard outside the dreamy, the director recalls, another typo here, that the governments had promised that this war-to-end war would be fought mainly on the epic wastes of the moon. Well, it was not the first time the government had lied. Just now, the universal tragedy seemed somehow less than Milton's personal one. But Florida discovered that the Solites were not space travellers, they merely came back in time from 15,000 years in the future. They did not reveal this out of kindness. They knew Earthlings stood on the brink of supreme catastrophe and could not bear to tell them so. They are the descendants of the few survivors of a total war. That is the reason, as soon as they had time travel, which was an application of the Port Matter formula, they came back to salvage what they could, the birds and plants, and things almost extinct because of the catastrophe. The blood-red moon that Milton saw, if you remember the story, which I have narrated on another video, he saw a blood-red moon before he came back to Earth, or rather travelled back through time. Was Earth's moon burning with atomic fires? Reversal and recognition. Aristotle's theory of tragedy. The tragic hero undergoes both of these, and this is what we are witnessing now. Agnosis. Milton's recognition of the true nature of his own circumstances. Peripeteia. Milton's reversal of fortune due to a change in his circumstances. Although the change is actually a change in... his circumstances change because he has come to realise the true nature of his circumstances. A moment of great self-realisation for Milton is in the offing, beginning with the realisation that Solite was what in English is called Earth, that the Solites were only Earthmen and women, that his dear Amada was no alien creature at all, but very much an Earthwoman. Questions. What is the domain within which the explanation of the cunning of reason applies? What is it that is being explained? What is the nature of the explanatory mechanism? For Smith and Ferguson, the domain is the social order. The phenomena to be explained are social structures, practice, and institutions. The explanation consists in showing how they come about as the result of the actions of inhuman ordinary humans and of no design whatever. For Hegel, the domain is spiritual history. The phenomenon to be explained is humanity's ever-growing self-understanding. The explanation consists in showing how history uses as its instruments the result of the actions of a few heroic humans, so as to unfold the execution of reason's design. What gives the doctrine of the cunning of reason its great explanatory power over other putatively similar doctrines is this emphasis upon self-understanding or self-realization of humanity as well as of the individual. This in itself then serves as a motor compelling humanity forwards towards a richer way of being. And it applies not just to great men or women. Upon discovering the true nature of the catastrophe, "Thank God," the director exclaimed. This is staggering news. This changes everything." Milton looked up briefly, annihilatingly, then sunk his ravaged face back into his hands. "For me, it doesn't change a thing," he said.